The next national election scheduled for Scotland is, of course, the UK general election, making that both the first and the most obvious opportunity to seek what I described back in June as a de facto referendum.
Nicola Sturgeon there, the Scottish First Minister, speaking in the last few minutes, saying she wants to make the 2024 general election a de facto referendum on independence. Tim Shipman is the Sunday Times' chief political commentator. He's here for PMQs Unpacked, which will bring you just after midday. Tim, how successful do you think Nicola Sturgeon is going to be, given that she's turned every general election and Scottish Parliament election into a de facto referendum and it hasn't worked?
Well, look, it gives her a democratic play. I don't think anybody's very surprised by this ruling, and I don't think anyone would be terribly surprised that Nicola Sturgeon says it's undemocratic. The problem she's got is that if you ask people if they want to leave the UK in Scotland, that number veers between about 48% and about 52% the whole time. If you ask them whether people there want a referendum, it never much gets above 45%. And people remember the last one as being highly disruptive, and they didn't enjoy it very much. So even people who might in extremis vote for independence don't want a referendum, and that's the problem she's never quite got past. The other problem she's got is if she does turn the general election, into this de facto referendum, the SNP, while it keeps winning huge numbers of seats, has never won 50% of the vote in a national election. And that's quite a high bar to clear, particularly at a time when the Tory party in London is not doing so well. You're less likely, I think, we can all agree, to see a Conservative Party returned with a large majority. And that allows the Labour Party in Scotland to say, look, the best way of getting rid of a lot of the stuff you don't like is to elect a Labour government, which means it's highly likely that the Labour Party does a lot better in Scotland next time round. And that will make it increasingly difficult for Sturgeon to get the votes that she needs. A lot of those people who used to vote Labour and have been voting SNP on constitutional grounds may well start voting Labour again, and it seems vanishingly unlikely to most people that I speak to who are well plugged in up there that this is likely to be a successful gambit on her part.
And that's the point, isn't it? Because, they've been in power for a long time. There are lots of problems, whether it's the state of the NHS, which is as bad in Scotland as is anywhere else, arguably. The state of schools, they've just got a record to run on. It would be extraordinary for them to make huge gains. They can't really, because they've got so many of the seats already. So
it's about the votes rather than the seats, and they've always done well on seats in recent times, but they've just never quite got there on votes. Even with the biggest, sort of stonking moment where they swept the board, they fell just short of 50% in the actual vote. There are a lot of people, whisper it quietly, who think this is Nicola Sturgeon's sort of bailout moment, and this is her way of, continuing to push for independence. But if she doesn't get it, this could be, I think a lot of people think, the final act of her frontline political career. And some people think she's had enough of all this and is happy to walk away if she doesn't get what she wants.
And how concerned, you speak to lots of people in Number 10, which I'm aware is a difficult thing to keep.
Well, they're a constantly changing array of people, of course.
In terms of the Rishi Sunak Number 10, how gripped by concerns about preserving the union, Nicola Sturgeon, at various points, different prime ministers have either rushed up there. Liz Truss said she was going to ignore her. How high on the list of things that keep Rishi Sunak awake at night is the State of the Union?
I've never got the impression that to Rishi Sunak personally, this is like one of the driving forces of his political identity. But at the same time, I think they are concerned about it, and they've been resolved to behave differently to the way Liz Truss behaved. Don't forget, Michael Gove is back in the Cabinet. Ben Wallace is still the Defence Secretary. They're probably the two members of the Cabinet that care most about it. Gove, of course, was born in Aberdeen. Wallace used to be a member of the Scottish Parliament. They're the people behind the scenes that tend to agitate, along with, people like Alistair Jack and whoever, is the Scottish Secretary this week. Their approach is to try and promote the benefits. This is the view that Michael Gove took when he was doing the union for Boris Johnson, and he's, as I understand it, back being influential on these matters with Rishi Sunak. Liz Truss's approach was to call them separatists and effectively draw dividing lines and get very aggressive about it. There's some evidence that sort of softly approach was beginning to bear fruit. You know, London's been relatively intelligent in the way it's distributed money to the north. They've done city deals. They've been handing money directly to councils, sort of without the SNP being able to intervene. And funnily enough, lots of those councils quite like getting that money from London. And London's got a lot better at advertising the fact in the way that the EU used to, that where that money is coming from, and saying these are the benefits of the union. You know,
stick the union flag on everything.
Exactly, it began with the vaccine rollout and a lot of other things like that. But they've continued that, and I think the Sunak approach is back to something resembling what Boris Johnson, after the first few months had adopted. Johnson was a bit like Truss. He wanted to go hard and tell them to go stuff themselves, but was convinced that wasn't actually a particularly productive way of going about things. And I think we're back to, Johnson 2.0, and, Sunak is of the same ilk, whereas Truss was very much, Johnson 1.0.
Yeah. We'll see what reaction Rishi Sunak has. I imagine Ian Blackford might bring it up at PMQs. PMQs Unpacked is coming live. We are on YouTube. We're on the YouTubes already. A couple hundred people already there. Look, hello from Taunton, hello from upstate New York, Ipswich, London. Oh, London Bridge. That's Brian in the office. Get on
it's
YouTube.
It's good to know someone's paying attention.
Times Radio YouTube channel. You can watch PMQs Unpacked live. Just want to play something else to you, Tim. A big sort of event in Westminster this morning. The Home Affairs Select Committee. Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, has been answering questions about the asylum system, what happened at Manston. Really interesting question, this. Tory MP Tim Lawton is the one asking the question in this clip.
Just a bit of role play. I'm a 16-year-old orphan from an East African country escaping a war zone and religious persecution. And I have a sibling legally in the United Kingdom at the moment. What is a safe and legal route for me to come to the United Kingdom?
We have... you're fleeing which country, sorry?
Any African country.
Any African country. Well, we have an asylum system, and people can put in applications for asylum.
How would I do that?
Well, you can do it through the safe and legal routes that we have. We have offered 390,000 places to people seeking safety from various countries around the world.
I'm not Syrian, I'm not Afghan, I'm not Ukrainian, not any of those specific schemes. The Dub scheme is historic. What scheme's open to me?
Well, if you are able to get to the UK, you are able to put in an application for asylum.
But I would only enter the UK illegally then, wouldn't I?
Well, that would, if you put in your application for asylum upon arrival, that would be the process that you enter.
How could I arrive in the UK if I didn't have permission to get onto an aircraft legally to arrive in the UK?
Let me just invite other colleagues if there's anything they want to add.
And there, Tim Shipman, is the problem that Suella Braverman and the Conservatives have when pressed on that question. They keep saying that people should enter the UK legally, and there are no ways to do that.
No. I mean, it sounded firstly like she didn't know what she was talking about, and then it became clear that she knew exactly what she was talking about, which is that there's no way that kid could make it here unless they took an illegal route.
We've also been hearing as well, I think, our colleague Matt Data was reporting that the sad case of the death at Manston, last week, they haven't been able to identify or contact the family of the Iraqi migrant who died after staying at Manston for a week. That's been coming out from the Home Affairs Select Committee this morning. Plenty more of that throughout the day here on Times Radio. But up next, it's PMQs Unpacked. We'll go live to the House of Commons. We'll pause the action as Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer clash across the dispatch box.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
It's 12 o'clock. I'm Matt Chorley. This is Times Radio. PMQs Unpacked is next. First, a look at the headlines this lunchtime. Nicola Sturgeon has said the next Scottish election will be a de facto referendum after the Supreme Court ruled that Scotland cannot hold a referendum of its own without the UK's authority. The First Minister of Scotland said the partnership is not voluntary. 7 people, including a gunman, have died in a shooting at a Walmart supermarket in America. One employee claims the shop's manager was behind the attack in Chesapeake in Virginia. The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, as we were just hearing, is claiming the problems at a migrant processing centre in Kent lies with people arriving in the UK illegally and people smugglers. Until recently, Manston had been operating at double the capacity, but is now empty. A man's paid tribute to his wife killed in a fire in Nottingham, saying she was a happy, bubbly woman who wouldn't have the heart to hurt a fly. Police are treating the death of her and her 2 daughters as murder. And predictions are already starting around the possible sale of Manchester United. One expert suggested current owners, the Glazer family, could end up selling the club for up to £4.5 billion. We'll have a full news and sport roundup at past. But now it's time for this.
PMQs Unpacked on Times Radio. Unpacking the politics and cutting through the crossfire.
Order, order. I call Matt Chorley and Tim Shipman.
Yeah, PMQs Unpacked, as we do every Wednesday at midday. Sunday Times, his chief political commentator Tim Shipman is here.
Hello.
Hello, Tim. Nice to have you with us.
Yes.
People joining us on the YouTubes, get on the Times Radio YouTube channel. Terry is in Liverpool. Fiona is in Bromley. Philip is in France. Buckinghamshire, Dartmoor. You're all on there. Let us know where you are. What you'd like to see coming out of PMQs. Where do you think we're going to go today, Tim Shipman?
Well, there's a number of things that Starmer could have a go at, but they're slightly, this huge Brexit row that's been happening in the Tory party has been quite interesting, but Starmer doesn't tend to like to go after that. It's not impossible they'll pick up on what's been going on at the Home Affairs Select Committee, but I would imagine we're not that far removed from the budget that they will probably still want to put the Prime Minister on the spot over some of the details of that, not least because last week, of course, was deputy PMQs.
Yes, we've had a couple of weeks without
Starmer's not really had a chance to have a proper crack at Sunak on it, post the fallout. So
it also feels possibly like one of those weeks which used to get in normal times a bit more, where leaders of the opposition, whether that was David Cameron or Ed Miliband, sort of come with their own story, drop a bomb at PMQs, set the agenda rather than following it.
Yeah, that's entirely possible, and it could be one of those where he tries to sort of unseat him a little bit by just dancing around quite a lot, doing what William Hague used to do,
jumping around different parts of the fold.
Tony Blair, exactly, just make him, discombobulate him a bit, try and make him make a mistake.
And the other thing we're keeping an eye out for is, does Rishi Sunak listen to Times Radio? Has he, because we were talking on the show yesterday about, they keep banging on about Jeremy Corbyn. Boris Johnson did it, Liz Truss did it, Rishi Sunak does it, saying, you sat with Jeremy Corbyn, you want to make Jeremy Corbyn Prime Minister. And we had this YouGov poll that showed only 19% of people knew that Keir Starmer had backed Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. 24% thought he was an opponent, and 57% had no idea one way or the other.
I mean, I sit through a lot of focus groups. I have never once heard anyone unprompted make that allusion.
Yeah, they've been banging away for such a long time.
I find it's one of the things about recent Prime Minister's questions that I find most perplexing. But they must have some polling of their own that shows that it's attractive to certain people, and I imagine the people they think it's attractive to are the people in the red wall seats
who were put off by Jeremy Corbyn.
Who were very put off by Jeremy Corbyn. Some of them were attracted by Boris Johnson, and for some of them it was a bit of both. And I guess that's what they're going after. But how many of those people are watching Prime Minister's questions is another interesting question.
Well, let us know what you think of PMQs. Mikey Smith from the Mirror's just tweeted, Tory MP Bill Cash was just leafing through a document on the back benches ahead of PMQs. One of the pages was a giant full-page colour photograph of Boris Johnson. Well, whatever floats your boat, Bill. Right, here we go then. Let's go live to the House of Commons. It's PMQs Unpacked. We kick off with question number 1 from Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and congratulations to England and Wales on their start to the World Cup, and good luck for the rest of the tournament. Mr. Speaker, the World Cup doesn't belong to FIFA, and it doesn't belong to the host nation. It belongs to everyone who loves football. It's totally unacceptable that during this tournament, gay football fans are unable to acknowledge who they love, and players have been threatened with suspension if they show solidarity with those fans. Shame on FIFA. Britain faces the lowest growth of any OECD nation over the next 2 years. Why?
Mr. Speaker, this country has experienced since 2010 the third highest growth in the G7. This year, the fastest growth in the G7, and unemployment at a multi-decade low. We're getting on to deliver more growth, Mr. Speaker. We're delivering free ports. We're investing in apprenticeships. We're protecting R&D. And if the Labour Party is serious about actually supporting growth, maybe they should get on the phone with their union paymasters and tell them to call off the strikes.
Well, there's quite a lot there to dig into. I wondered whether Keir Starmer was going to mount a few questions on FIFA and Britain's role in it.
Indeed, but he seemed dissatisfied with saying, I'm a massive football fan,
I'm
look
a
at
big
me.
football... Well...
What about you, Rishi Sunak? And Rishi Sunak did not suddenly weigh in on the football.
He just ignored it altogether.
Yeah.
Well, are you in the lobby league?
I am.
How are you doing?
I'm sort of mid-table mediocrity, Matt, which is where I tend to be.
Well, some of
I've
us
got
are
Argentina second in my list, so that's not going so well.
I've got Argentina quite high on the list as well. So you should explain this is a sort of fantasy football league thing. You had to pick some teams. No one would describe me as a massive football fan. However, I am currently third in the league table. Rishi Sunak is 24th.
He was second yesterday.
Keir Starmer is 22nd. And Tim Shipman is 167th.
Not all my teams have played yet, Matt. It's only at the end of the first round of matches that you can get
Is that right?
A clear idea
on the basis that I'm going to
stand.
do very badly. I'm enjoying the fact I'm currently in third place. Rishi Sunak, Keir Starmer then jumping to this OECD report, which, is really bad. We're going to have terrible growth over the next 2 years, worse than most countries in the G20, but it sort of goes on the pile of gloomy bad news, doesn't it?
It's gloomy bad news, and Sunak goes, well, have you got some statistics? So have I.
I've got some statistics. And you're
interesting,
in bed with
though,
the rail unions.
The first one he digs out is, highest growth in the G7 since, 2010. So suddenly, here's one of the iterations of the Conservative government claiming ownership of all the others, whereas pretty well recently, certainly the Johnson and to a degree the Truss administrations were very much, this is year zero, everything that went before was an aberration, we don't support all that, now we're doing our own thing. Sunak kind of saying, I stand in a tradition of growth that goes back to the coalition.
Actually, in that 12 years, clearly lots happened. Brexit's happened, the pandemic's happened. If you're using that as the sort of... And actually, I saw someone did some statistics on it. If you do it growth per capita and so on, it's slightly less...
You can pretty much prove anything you want with statistics. I think, the bigger picture is that people feel things are a bit rough at the moment, and Starmer can play around with them. It doesn't really matter what Sunak says in response in terms of numbers.
In fact, how Henry's just pointed out, is third highest in the G7 really very impressive? 3 out of 7 is basically just the middle.
Well, it's basically not even, it's slightly better than I'm doing in the lobby World Cup football.
Third highest in a lobby league of hundreds of people is much better. Right, let's go back to the House of Commons then. This is question 2 from Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, we're
Order. We want to get through Prime Minister's questions, and you're not helping me. Keir Starmer.
Speaker Lindsay
He's
Hoyle
in total denial. We're bottom of the 38 OECD countries who are all in the same boat when it comes to COVID and Ukraine. And he wants a pat on the back. It's like a football manager, bottom of the league at Christmas, celebrating an away draw 3 months ago, and it won't wash. So they don't like their record, that's the problem. So let's try it another way. Why is Britain set to be the first country into recession and the last country out?
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased that the Right Honourable Gentleman brought up the OECD report, because it contained actually 3 very important points. Firstly, it made the point that actually in the years following the pandemic, we're projected to have almost the highest growth amongst our peer countries. It also made the point, it was crystal clear that the challenges we face are completely international in nature. And thirdly, thirdly, Mr. Speaker, it supported our fiscal plan because it's credible and ensures sustainability. Now, the right honourable gentleman would have known all of that if he actually read the whole report. But he's not interested in substance. He's an opportunist, Mr. Speaker. In 4 weeks, Mr. Speaker, in 4 weeks, I've strengthened the economy. We've put more money into the NHS and schools. We've delivered a deal to tackle illegal migration. In the same 4 weeks, all we've...
Oh, he's being interrupted again by Lindsay Hoyle.
When I stand, you've got to sit down. But can I just say to you, you came to me quite rightly and said to me, we want to get through Prime Minister's questions. I'm going to give short answers. Please stick to what you have.
Oh, Rishi Sunak ticked off for talking too much there. But he was going on a bit, wasn't he?
Well, he was, but it's a little bit rum to cut across his sort of big peroration there. If you're the Speaker, that was almost Bakovian in its...
Although it's interesting that
debatus interruptus.
He's obviously gone to Lindsay Hoyle and says, let's rattle through it. Let's not have any long answers. Let's zip through. And then he was getting a little bit windy there. A football metaphor from Keir Starmer.
Yes, another one.
I
know me football.
Yeah, more than you do. But the problem he's got is that Rishi Sunak knows his economics more than he does.
And also, his reputation in the last government, while Boris Johnson, could barely read a 2-page summary of something, he was reading the appendices and interrogating the basis of assumptions in the models and all the rest of it. And there we go. He's obviously read the detail. Interesting answer, though, talking about, yes, it's all these international challenges. Well, everybody's got these international challenges, and that was one of his 3 points. I wonder how quickly someone will mutter to him, yeah, but we've got lousy productivity, mate, and have had for years. Or then there's that B-word thing. Is that having an effect at all?
And also, your supply-side reforms, like, for instance, planning.
Yes.
Let's build more homes.
Which you've just junked because 50 of your MPs have got their knickers in a twist.
Yeah. And in fact, our colleague Lara Spirit, Times Red Box reporter, reporting in the last few minutes, former Cabinet Minister Simon Clarke's tabled an amendment to the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill to overturn the ban on new onshore wind. Telling Lara, if we're going to have some anti-growth amendments on the bill, we might as well have some pro-growth ones too.
There we go.
More
trouble at mill from both sides.
Trouble at windmill, yeah.
But an interesting, just to interrogate that answer just slightly more. I mean, there was the great example there of what's good about Sunak, that he's read the detail, he understands it, and he's prepared to fight on it. Then what was much better about Boris Johnson than Rishi Sunak in terms of this kind of... You're an opportunist, Mr. Speaker. I mean, that was where Johnson would have deployed Captain Hindsight or something memorable and a bit humorous that would have kind of caught the imagination a bit.
Yeah.
And Sunak didn't have anything like that. He might have done if Lindsay Hoyle hadn't cut him off, but I rather doubt that he had anything that pithy.
Well, if he has, he'll probably deploy it again in a minute. This is PMQs Unpacked. Tim Shipman, the Sunday Times chief political commentator, is here. Don't forget you can watch along on the Times Radio YouTube channel. Let's go back to the House of Commons then. There's question number 3 from Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, there's only one party that's crashed the economy, and they're sitting there. And I noticed this, Mr. Speaker. I noticed this. He won't say why Britain is set to be the first into a recession and the last out. So I will. 12 years of Tory failure, followed by 12 weeks of Tory chaos. For a decade, they've let our economy drift aimlessly before suddenly cutting the parachute ropes and slamming it to the ground. And because of the changes he's made, a typical household will end up with tax increases of £1,400. They don't want to hear about these tax increases of £1,400. Contrast that to a super wealthy non-dom living here but holding their income overseas. How much more...
Order. Mr. Young, I don't need any more. I don't need shouting, don't need pointing. You're meant to be a good example when you sit on this front bench. Because you're the second, don't spoil what you're meant to do.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think I want to hear this. Because of the changes he's made, a typical household will end up paying tax increases of £1,400. Contrast that to a super wealthy non-dom living here but holding their income overseas. How much more has he asked them to pay?
Just order. As I said to the Prime Minister, I said to the Leader of the Opposition, I've got to get through this list. I need you both to help me.
Oh, he's had his waiting mix this morning.
Come on.
Lindsay Hoyle.
Mr. Speaker, Labour had 13 years to address this issue and did nothing. Nothing. It was the Conservative government that took action and tightened the rules. But the problem with his idea is that it would end up costing Britain money. Not my words, the words of the former Labour Shadow Chancellor. But rather than peddling fairy tales and gesture politics, let's actually tell him what we're doing to deliver for this country. A record increase in the national living wage, protecting millions from energy bills, protecting the pensioners' triple lock. That's what we're doing for this country.
Right. Apart from the fact that Lindsay Hoyle is cross.
He's cross.
I think it's Jacob Young. He's a whip who is ticking off Conservative. Some decent lines from Keir Starmer.
Yeah, quite punchy language. This
12
is not...
years of Tory failure by 12 weeks of chaos.
Well, that was used by Rachel Reeves in her response to the budget and was easily the thing that best summed up what I was hearing in the focus groups that evening. That was basically the view of punters who voted Tory in 2019, who were just a bit weary of the whole thing now. So that's a good line, and they've given it to Starmer now as well. And yeah, he's, all the stuff about cutting the parachute ropes and slamming to the ground. This is not natural Starmer language, but they've got him expressing himself more clearly, more punchily, and this is good prep from the Labour team, I think. Shout out to a few of the comms team there, Paul Ovenden in particular, who's the head of attack. He's good at putting this kind of language in Starmer's mouth, and he's beginning to sound like it comes naturally to him. And, this is not the Keir Starmer we saw 18 months ago.
And then on raising non-doms again because of Rishi Sunak's wife and her non-dom status until earlier this year. And then Rishi Sunak saying it would end up costing Britain money. They're quoting former Labour Shadow Chancellor Ed Balls, who did say if you abolish the whole status, it'll probably end up costing Britain money because people will leave the country. He did say that in 2015 in January. But by April, he was promising to abolish the non-dom rule.
Yeah, so you pick your quotes and you take your choice.
Exactly.
But this is an interesting one as well, because what you've got here is a classic example of head against heart. And Sunak is trying to play the head thing and say, look, if you actually cut this, people stop coming to Britain, they don't put money into the economy, that costs Britain money. It's fine. It's probably technically correct. And as a political argument, it's very grown up and sensible. But the emotional argument is these people don't pay their taxes, we pay our taxes.
And lots of people will think...
And it's an emotional argument.
Who cares if they're not paying any tax, who cares if they leave? Will be the
heart
response.
Trump's head in these things, and I had a conversation with one of the Shadow Chancellor's team about this last week. They want to keep hammering this. They think that this pings the heartstrings of the electorate and is going to win them a lot of votes.
Well, let's go back now to the House of Commons. PMQs Unpacked continues. Keir Starmer's is question number 4. He's frozen, apparently. Oh, maybe. But this isn't going to please Lindsay Hoyle if he can't even start his question. Never mind, wind it up and finish it. Well, I'll come back to him in just a moment to see what Keir Starmer's got. This feels so far, a halfway point, like maybe this isn't going to be a vintage edition of PMQs.
It's not vintage, but it's if we're talking football again, which Starmer seems to want to talk. He's scored a couple of cheap goals, hasn't he, so far? And the goalkeeper on the other side is doing his best to jump up and down and flail his arms, but the ball keeps still gently sliding past him into the net.
Lots of people on the YouTube channel is very exercised about Rishi Sunak harking back to the last Labour government and what they did or didn't do on non-doms. Matt says blaming a government that's been out of power for 12 years is pathetic. Rishi Sunak doesn't impress me at all. Someone else, 12 years, Brexit failure, Tory economic policy has to be responsible. Rishi cannot escape the record.
Well, that's all true, but the interesting point is Starmer has not uttered the word Brexit in any of this, and there are a lot of people on his own side would like him to do so. So that's interesting in itself.
But then I suppose that gives Rishi Sunak, the fact they're thinking more, they are thinking several steps ahead. Were he to raise Brexit, Rishi Sunak will say, well, you wanted us to rejoin and you wanted freedom of movement, you don't know where you stand. Anyway, let's go back then. I think it's now working. Keir Starmer is unfrozen. He's thawed out. Question number 4 from Keir Starmer.
If they'd grown the economy at the same rate as the last Labour government, we'd have tens of billions of pounds more to spend on that. And Mr. Speaker, it wasn't a trick question. The answer is he's not asked non-doms to pay a penny more. Every year, he talks about the money. Every year, that's £3.6 billion thrown away because he won't make them pay their taxes here. How many extra doctors could Britain afford with that money?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased that he brought up doctors, because last week we delivered record increases in funding for the NHS. Not just more doctors, but more nurses, more scans, more operations. That shows our commitment to prioritise the NHS. Not my words, the words of the NHS Chief Executive.
Oh, he's finished. So he's taken the...
he's done the short answer malarkey.
I was on a big gulp of coffee there, assuming we had several more minutes of... what do we love? Doctors, and not just doctors, but nurses too.
And scans.
Scans. And more operations.
Hurrah. Well, I mean, there in a nutshell is what we were just talking about. It only raises... he hasn't asked non-doms to pay a bit more. Well, maybe it might have been an idea politically to do so. Starmer's making a lot of fuss about 3.6 billion quid in what was a 55 billion black hole, as a member of the government said to me. That's all they're talking about. They've got a 3 billion solution to a 55 billion pound problem.
Yeah.
Again, great. Rhetorical point.
Yeah.
Win for the Tories. Emotional point. Anyone watching that who's living in Doncaster or the Tees Valley is not going, I'm sure Rishi Sunak's got a very good point about the non-doms and the extra money coming in, and I'm sure that helps the health service.
And actually, 55 billion, though, another 3 billion is not going to hurt.
No, quite. I mean, you need what you can get. And don't forget, what was the extra boost to the NHS? I think they put about 8 billion in, but the extra schools stuff was about 3-4 billion, I think, and that would be precisely paid for by something like this.
And particularly when everyone else is going to be paying more tax, it's clearly something that the Labour Party is going to bang away at. Right, let's go back to the House of Commons then. As this is their new pithier questions and answers. This is question number 5 from Keir Starmer.
Scrapping the non-dom status would allow us to train 15,000 doctors every year. That's what Labour would do. And we can carry on handing out tax breaks to the super rich. Or we can live in a society where people don't have to go private to get a doctor's appointment. It's that simple.
As we revealed this week,
he
that's
also
what
hands
Rishi Sunak
Shell
does.
90p for every £1 they spend drilling. So they haven't paid a penny in windfall tax. Mr. Speaker, you may have seen this week that somebody shredded £10,000 in protest at those propping up an oil and gas giant. But he shreds £10,000 every other minute propping them up. Which does he think is the more absurd?
Mr. Speaker, this is the government that has actually put in place an economic plan that will deliver confidence and stability to our economy. And all I've heard from the Honourable Gentleman today, there's no answers, there's no substance, because there's no plan, Mr. Speaker. He talks about the NHS. We're delivering record funding for the NHS, but we can only do that on the foundations of a strong economy. You can't deliver for the NHS unless you have a plan for the economy, and he doesn't have either, Mr. Speaker.
That was a sort of word salad from Keir Starmer by the end. The throwing in Joe Lycett and shredding £10,000, which he didn't do. It was a stunt, which actually got people talking. It was quite a good point you made, that you could train 15,000 doctors every year.
That's a classic stick it on a poster in a general election point.
What do you want, non-doms or doctors?
Yeah. Job done.
Job done.
And there's just, in Sunak's response, there's a slight tetchiness in his... It's just like, come off it, mate.
Yeah,
you don't,
come on.
Come
You
on.
did this
I'm
last
doing
week.
all this, and you don't seem to understand that we're doing the best we can. And he's inherited this job at a very difficult time. As someone said to me the other day, why would you want this job? It's like becoming chairman of Woolworths now, which is not a good thing. And he's doing the best he can, and he's putting up an okay fight on the substance. But, a lot of Tory MPs are going to be watching this and thinking, they're just going to keep hammering us on this stuff. He's a rich bloke. They're going to play the emotional card on tax and the NHS, and maybe the worm's just turned and there's not a lot we can do about winning this next election. And then they'll get increasingly fractious. You're already seeing people say, quite young people of 35 or 40 who would normally be hoping to start a political career saying, I've had enough and I'm not going to stand at the next election.
Yeah.
Chloe Smith, I think, admittedly came in at the age of 25, which is very young to be becoming an MP. But, people like that walking away, it's not like they're 72 and, going to put their feet up in the shires.
The other thing worth pointing out, Keir Starmer making this play on non-doms, and you could train some more doctors. Feeding into all of that was, he sparked some controversy a week or so ago, and he was talking about how he thought we were, because he wants to curb immigration and we shouldn't be importing doctors to the point, and he faced some criticism of that. But that's their answer to the immigration problem as well, isn't it? That if we were training up people for these jobs, spending government money, training people up for these jobs, yes, it does take a long time to get doctors in. But that's also, he's sort of quite cleverly covering himself off on several fronts there politically.
Yeah, and the interesting thing from Sunak is he hasn't responded, talking about the workforce plan. Now, Jeremy Hunt, who was Health Secretary and Chairman of the Health Select Committee, he wrote a book about it all. His big thing is that we've not been training enough doctors and nurses. Loads of people apply and don't get in. Yeah. And all we need to do really is find some money and get them trained. And admittedly, the next but one government is the one most likely to benefit from this. But
there was a workforce plan.
There was a workforce plan in the budget.
Yeah.
And I'm surprised Sunak hasn't made a bit more of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, let's go back to the House of Commons. The last question from Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, every time he opens his mouth, another powerful business voice says he hasn't got a plan on growth. Yeah. The failure of the last 12 years and the chaos of the last 12 weeks are compounded by the decisions he's taking now. He won't follow Labour's plan to scrap non-dom status. Instead, we've got an NHS staffing crisis. He won't follow Labour's plan to make oil and gas giants pay their fair share. Instead, he hammers working people. And he won't push through planning reform. Instead, he kills off the dream of home ownership. Too weak to take on his party. Too weak to take on vested interest. 12 long years of Tory government, 5 Prime Ministers, 7 Chancellors. Why do they always clobber working people?
A lot of cheering now from the Labour side.
Mr. Speaker, he talks about leadership. This summer, I stood on my principles and told the country what they needed to hear, even though it was difficult. When he ran for leader, he told his party what they wanted to hear. And even now, he says one thing and he does the other. He says he cares for working people, but he won't stand up to the unions. He said he'd honour Brexit, but he tried to have a second referendum. And now he tries to talk tough about immigration, but he promised to defend free movement. You can trust him to deliver for his party. You can trust me to deliver for the country.
No mention of Jeremy Corbyn.
No mention of Jeremy Corbyn.
Which I thought we were about to get then. Having done the unions and the second referendum, that would have been normally completed the trilogy.
Well, in a pretty desperate session for Sunak, that was a pretty good ending, I thought.
Not bad at winding up.
I told the truth, and there's still a lot of people in the Labour Party who are rather angsty that Keir Starmer betrayed himself as a man of the left in order to get the Corbynistas on board, and then promptly chuck them all overboard.
The counter argument to that is, suggests Keir Starmer's a better politician than Rishi Sunak, because when Rishi Sunak told his party what they didn't want to hear, he didn't win.
They told him where to take a running jump. No, exactly. Look, I mean, that's their 4th session. I think that's probably the clearest Starmer victory that we've seen, and I think there's a lot to encourage the Labour Party there. You've got a leader who's got some good political dividing lines. He's got some good language, and he's rather flustering and irritating the bloke on the other side of the dispatch box. And then, well, you know, where you've got a Prime Minister in a difficult spot who's a serious bloke, who's trying to do what he thinks is the right thing, and he will continue to sort of argue on that basis. But at the moment, it doesn't look like a winning proposition. And I think there's a lot that frames what we're going to see for the next year and a half in that debate today.
One thing that leapt out to me there, clobber working people. That feels like a phrase lifted straight from a focus group. Clobber doesn't feel like a word that Keir Starmer would naturally reach for.
No, I don't think he's a clobberer.
But in the world of repeating back to the public phrases they use in focus groups, you know, get Brexit done, take back control. Yeah. All the Tories do is clobber working people. Feels like a phrase that they've taken, you know, and Deborah Mattison used to come on the show a lot before she went to work for Keir Starmer. That feels like something straight out of one of her focus groups.
Yeah, absolutely. And Deborah was good at the focus groups. I used to do quite a lot of. I used to sit in quite a few of them when before she was with the Labour government. The Labour government. Goodness me, there we go.
Not yet, Tim.
Not yet.
As the polls suggest. Well, there we are. That brings us to the end of Keir Starmer versus Rishi Sunak. But stay tuned, because on today of all days, we'll, of course, have some lovely, hot Ian Blackford action next. We'll do the best of the rest on PMQs after we get the latest news from Cara Bentley.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
Good afternoon, I'm Rachel Jewell. Nicola Sturgeon says the next Scottish election will be a de facto referendum after the Supreme Court ruled this morning that Scotland cannot hold a referendum without the UK's authority. The First Minister of Scotland says the partnership is not voluntary and that she's disappointed with the results.
Unless we give up on democracy, and again, for the avoidance of any doubt, I, for one, am simply not prepared to do that. We must and we will find another democratic, lawful and constitutional means by which the Scottish people can express their will. In my view, that can only be an election.
In the House of Commons, the SNP Westminster leader Ian Blackford said the Prime Minister has every right to oppose independence. He has no right to deny democracy to the people of Scotland. 6 people have been shot dead at a Walmart supermarket in the US state of Virginia. The gunman, believed to be the Chesapeake store's manager, also died, while several more are injured. Boris Johnson has criticised major European nations for their initial response to Russia's aggression towards Ukraine, accusing Germany of adopting a disastrous stance, he claims, as Russian battalions amassed on the border. Germany thought if there was to be an invasion, the best result was a swift Russian victory. He says France was in denial about the possibility of war, while Italy claimed it couldn't support a tough response due to its reliance on Russian energy. However, Mr Johnson said after altering its initial approach, the EU has done brilliantly. There are yellow warnings for rain in the southwest and Northern Ireland. A band of heavy rain will move eastwards, accompanied with strong and gusty winds. Toby Gillis has the sports.
Supporters of Manchester United are cautiously welcoming news that their controversial owners are prepared to sell the club. The Glazers bought the second most successful club in English football in a leveraged buyout 17 years ago and have been the subject of protest by supporters angry at the way they've run them ever since. It's thought they'd take between £6 and £8 billion. The Times chief sports correspondent Matt Lawton says there's a reason to make them the most expensive sporting body sold in the history of sport.
You could argue that Manchester United is the biggest football brand in the world. They claim to have over 1 billion fans, and for that reason, they think, where we just saw Chelsea going for sort of 2.5 billion plus add-ons, they're thinking more in terms of 6 to 8 billion. The reason they're doing that is because they've got this massive global fan base.
The row about an anti-discrimination armband that nations playing at the World Cup have been forced to ditch is to go to the senior court in sport. The likes of England and Wales had planned to have their captains wear the armband during matches, but on the eve of the tournament they were told it'd result in sporting sanctions. Times Radio's Nick Ellaby reports.
The armband had been specifically designed by lawyers to avoid individual punishments for players, but world governing body FIFA has interpreted the sport's rules differently. It forced 7 nations to back down from wearing it in support of oppressed communities in Qatar, where the World Cup is being held. But the German Football Association have now revealed they're taking FIFA to the Court of Arbitration for Sport over the matter. It's thought a ruling could be made in time for the German captain Manuel Neuer to wear the armband in their second match of the tournament on Sunday, if it goes their way.
England are sweating on the results of a scan on their captain and talisman Harry Kane ahead of their second World Cup match. He's having an ankle knock looked at. Kane's got a history of ankle issues which have kept him out for lengthy periods. England play USA on Friday night. And the Manchester City manager, the most successful in the club's history, has signed a new contract at the club. Pep Guardiola has won 11 trophies in 6 years in charge of the current Premier League champions. The new contract will keep him there until 2025. You can read more on these stories on the Times website or app.
This is Times Radio.
Do you know the average amount people lose to online shopping scams? It's £642. At Lloyds Bank, we're determined to tackle fraud together with our customers. To find out about the latest scams that are out there and for expert advice on the different ways you and your family can stay safe, search Lloyds Bank Fraud Hub. Lloyds Bank, by your side. Statistic quoted is sourced from the 2021 UK Finance Fraud Report.
Today's tale begins when Sarah was scrolling through her feed. Suddenly, Sarah heard the scariest sound.
The Wi-Fi is down.
Sarah was trapped by the spinning wheel of doom.
Save yourself from broadband nightmares. Get BT's unbreakable hybrid broadband backed up by EE, the UK's best network. Search BT Hybrid Broadband. 88% UK availability. 4G connection takes up to 175 seconds. Best for mobile network performance. Verify at ee.co.uk/claims.
Matt Chorley on Times Radio with MasterCard's Strive UK programme, empowering small businesses to grow and thrive in the digital economy. Find out more at mastercard.co.uk/strive.
Very good afternoon to you. It's Matt Chorley on Times Radio. We're still live on the YouTube channel where you've just been watching Tim Shipman and I scrolling through our Twitters and tweets. Any hot gossip from Westminster, Tim?
The hottest gossip was that one of our viewers pointed out that I had a blonde hair on my shoulder. Given that my wife's hair is dark,
Right.
I can only assume it was attached to the headphones when I sat down.
That's your story and you're sticking to it. Ian's also been in touch, listening for the last time to the anti-Tory waffle from Shipman and some presenter on Times Radio.
The anti-Tory waffle.
Scribes who long for new Labour. PMQs should be scrapped. Boring.
Oh, I wish he'd get on Twitter and find out what a Tory patsy I am. He's
Yeah, exactly.
Constantly cozying up to number 10.
Yeah. And actually, Ian gets in touch on an almost daily basis. So thank you for pretending you don't know who I am as well, Ian.
Hello, Ian.
Thanks for joining along. And also, I mean, we're not single-handedly responsible for all of PMQs as well. Anyway, it's not us who's longing for a Labour government, Ian. It's the polls. And that's. I do apologise.
That'd be interesting if the polls had a Labour government.
Yes. If I'm sorry that we said something that you didn't agree with. I'm sure you can go and find an echo chamber somewhere else. Right, let's go back to the House of Commons now. It's the thing we've all been waiting for. Stand by your beds. It's a big day for Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the whole House will want to join me in welcoming the moderator of the Church of Scotland to our proceedings this afternoon and to thank him for his sermon at St Margaret's this morning. Mr. Speaker, this morning the Supreme Court clarified a point of law, but the very point of democracy in this union is now at stake, and democracy will not be denied. Because whether Westminster likes it or not, last year the people of Scotland voted for a Scottish Parliament with a majority and the mandate to deliver an independence referendum. The Prime Minister has every right to oppose independence. He has no right to deny democracy to the people of Scotland. If the Prime Minister keeps blocking that referendum, will he at least be honest and confirm that the very idea that the United Kingdom is a voluntary union of nations is now dead and buried?
Well, Mr. Speaker, let me start by saying we respect the clear and definitive ruling of the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom. And what I would say to the honourable gentleman, that, firstly, I am looking forward to also seeing the moderator of Scotland tomorrow. And I think that the people of Scotland want us to be working on fixing the major challenges that we collectively face, whether that's the economy, supporting the NHS, or indeed supporting Ukraine. Now is the time for politicians to work together, and that's what this government will do.
Ian Black. Quite a measured response there from Rishi Sunak. We should point out...
And a mention of the moderator, which is a slight surprise.
And we should point out that the SNP claim their majority for independence by lumping in the Greens, because they'd have needed to get an outright majority in the Scottish Parliament. They needed 65 of the 129 seats, and they only got 64. So, and if you want to get really technical about this, the Unionist Party has got a slight majority of votes in constituency contests, while pro-independence parties are the same in the regional list votes. So it is very, very close to the thing that we're...
But blah, blah, blah at the end of the day. The bottom line is if 65% of the Scottish electorate wanted a referendum, there would be a referendum, and they don't. And the SNP has never been able to get around that. And, you know, clarified a point of law. That was a delicious phrasing from, yes, you know, you've been delivered of the humiliating defeat that everyone predicted in court. But they've clarified a point of law.
They've clarified a point of law. And the arguments will just continue. And in fact, rolling in on exactly this question of should the SNP be allowed another referendum, a former Prime Minister, which one could it be, though? Because there are so many in the House of Commons right now. It's Theresa May popped up.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Scotland is a proud nation with a unique heritage. It is a valued member of our family of nations, a union of people bound through the generations by shared interests. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that this morning's Supreme Court decision gives the Scottish nationalists, the SNP, the opportunity for once to put the people of Scotland first? And end its obsession with breaking us apart.
I think that my right honourable friend put it very well, Mr. Speaker.
And then he sat down, knowing that the Speaker's been ticking him off. Just while we were listening to Theresa May, though, I looked up on the What Scotland Thinks tracker. So this is polling from October. Proportion of people who think there should be a independence referendum in the next year, 20%. In the next 2 years, another 17%. That's from Conway's. 22% said never. So, yeah, if only 1 in 5 are signed up to Nicola Sturgeon's timetable, that's quite a...
It just ain't going to happen. Yeah. And democratically, it shouldn't happen. And that's a bitter pill for them to swallow. But given that it's the main argument, and some would say the only argument they've been making for a decade or more, it suggests they perhaps ought to put their attentions elsewhere. But of course, I'm sure they won't. I mean, interesting that we got Theresa May there weighing in. Theresa May's form of Brexit in the end was defined, people who work for her tell me, primarily by a desire to keep the union together. She put that in the end above the good of the economy and all the rest of it. And, there are people who've said to me, for the endless book that I'm still writing, she effectively threw her premiership away to protect the union. So she, cares about this passionately. As we saw, it's not sort of prime core Sunak, but, when you've got someone banging away like that, all you need to do is say...
I agree.
You did well.
Yeah, very good. Just finally then, I think that last question we're going to take is from the Conservative MP John Penrose. We should point out he was the Prime Minister's anti-corruption czar. Back in June, he quit that job, claiming it was pretty clear that Boris Johnson had broken the ministerial code. That was specifically on Partygate, rather than all the other things. So John Penrose popping up. What's he got to say to the now Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak?
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has rightly promised to recruit a successor to Lord Geit as his ethics advisor promptly. But would he accept that threats to integrity are often broader than the job description of the Prime Minister's advisor on the ministerial code? And will he therefore commit to introduce the additional measures in the new 5-point integrity plan on topics like lobbying and conflicts of interest, developed with organisations like Transparency International and Spotlight on Corruption, to show he will walk the talk and put party integrity and government integrity at the heart of our democracy.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his comprehensive and thoughtful suggestions. As he acknowledged, he knows that I've committed to appointing an independent advisor on ministerial interests, and I very much look forward to studying his other proposals in proper time.
I think that's what we call a holding answer.
It's a holding answer, but it's not get lost, you buffoon. But interesting, yes. And I know I get criticised for this, but I do like to pick up on little stumbles of, would he like to walk the talk? I mean, that actually sort of makes sense, but normally you walk the walk rather than talk the talk. But if you're walking the talk, I suppose you're doing what you said you would. Not heard that one before. Actually quite like it.
Yeah.
May have been a mistake. I think we should take it up.
We will start. The campaign starts here to introduce that into conversation. So John Penrose in August published his 5-point plan to reset ethical standards in government.
Do you think that was a job application as well?
Well, he did it on the 5th of August, so it's entirely possible that everyone was on holiday and didn't notice. Or certainly embroiled in a leadership contest of one sort or another. But it's just another reminder of something else. Trouble in the in tray for Rishi Sunak. Dominic Raab's sitting behind him. He's under investigation. We just don't know by who
and
or
a
about
plethora
what.
of other problems loom. We are told.
Lovely stuff. Well, on that cheery note, I'll let you go off to walk the talk now, Tim Shipman. Tim Shipman, Chief Political Commentator for the Sunday Times. You can read him in the Sunday Times this weekend, of course. Once he's been out and about and found what it is that he's going to write about. In order to read him, you need to get yourself a digital subscription right now. You can pay £1 for your first 6 months. £1 a month for your first 6 months. Just go to thetimes.co.uk. Sign up now and you won't miss a single word that Tim writes. Or indeed that I write. As and when I get round to writing anything. Right, up next, we're going to speak to a man who's compiled a political compendium. And we might try and get him to do the quiz as well. It's Matt Chorley on Times Radio in association with Mastercard Strive's UK programme. You can find out more at mastercard.co.uk.